And welcome back to the channel. Mr. Acolyte here, coming at you with my how to play guide for Zato-1. Zato is one of my favorite characters in all of fighting games. While he is incredibly difficult to learn and very, very difficult to master, he's also one of the most fun and rewarding characters that you can find in fighting games today. Due to the fact that he is essentially two characters in one, and he has a very complex base mechanic, a lot of players find him a little too daunting to pick up, and that's where this guide comes in. In this guide, we'll cover everything you need to know about piloting Zato and Eddie together, so that you can go out there and become a mix-up monster. This guide is going to be separated into two different parts. Part 1 will cover Zato and Eddie's character tools. That way we know exactly what tools we're working with before we jump into Part 2, the actual how to play section. And that section will break down how to use all of Zato and Eddie's tools to basically terrorize your opponents. And if you end up finding this guide helpful at all, please consider leaving a like, as it does help out videos like this a ton. And consider subscribing if you want to see more guides like this in the future for a multitude of games, as well as online matches, match reviews, just all around fighting game stuff. That's basically my channel. I just love fighting games, and my channel is a representation of that. But with all that out of the way, let's not waste any more time and jump right on into it. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started with part 1 of this guide. This is the character tools section. In this part of the guide, we're going to break down all of Zato and Eddie's tools. That way we have all the information we need to fully understand how to actually pilot them. Now, before we get into the specifics, let's first lay the groundwork and talk about what kind of character exactly is Zato in the first place. Well, to put it simply, Zato is an extreme rushdown character. I say extreme because he has some of the craziest rushdown sequences you'll ever see in a fighting game, and that is because Zato is effectively two characters at once. That's where all of his strength as a character comes from, and that's where the difficulty comes from, is that ultimately you have to learn how to pilot two characters simultaneously. And by having two characters on the screen attacking the opponent at once, obviously that's going to be very, very hard to defend against. But once you get it down, Zato becomes a very fun, rewarding, and powerful character to have in your arsenal. So with all that being said, let's go ahead and start breaking down their character tools. We'll start with Zato first, and then we'll move on to Eddie, and then we'll move on to them as a duo. Okay, so let's go ahead and start at the very beginning with Zato himself. We'll talk about Eddie and his specifics later, but for now, let's go ahead and focus purely on Zato. And the first thing about Zato I feel like we should talk about is his very unique movement options. If you spent any time at all playing this game or watching this game, you'll know that most of the cast has what's called an air dash. You can air dash forward and backwards. And this is the standard way of traversing the screen in this game. Usually most characters start their offense in this way by air dashing and trying to close in on an opening. This is where Zato is a little bit different. He does like to be in the air as well, but unlike most characters who can, again, air dash and double jump, Zato, in place of those things, has what's called a flight mode. Simply by jumping and double tapping a direction, or as most of us do, tapping the dash macro in a direction, you can fly in that direction that you want for a second or two. And not only that, you have control over the momentum. So if I decide to fly forward, by holding forward, I'll keep going. But if I want to, kind of fake things out, I can dash and then hold back and fly backwards. I can even sort of stall and then fall straight down. You have a lot of control over where you go and how long you're in the air with Zato. And this is honestly one of his greatest strengths, because as we all know, high mobility in a fighting game is always a really good thing. Next, let's talk about Zato's special moves. Zato has 4 unique special moves that he can use without any assistance from Eddie. First up is undoubtedly the most important of his special moves, that being Invite Hell. This move is done by inputting down down H, and when you do that, as you can see, you will summon this ground projectile. This is useful basically everywhere. At neutral, it is a very powerful screen control option. In block strings, it is a fantastic ender. And whenever you get a knockdown, it is amazing for Oki. It is extremely plus, and it will actually beat most reversals because you can knock them down, do this, block, and if they do anything other than block themselves, you have plenty of time to react and continue your offense. This move is really, really good. Next up is 214S. When you do that, he will summon this barrier in front of him. This move has a lot of use cases. It can be used as a poke in certain situations and even as a combo ender. We'll talk about that again later in the guide. But the main use case for this is against projectiles. One of the best things about Zato is if a character has a really annoying projectile, most of them in the game he can deal with by utilizing this move. Not only is this attack completely projectile invulnerable, but most of the projectiles in the game, if you activate it at the right time, it will send it back at the opponent. Move number 3 is Break the Law. This is done by inputting 214K. When you do this, Zato will go underground. He goes underground for the length of how long you hold K. Now, this move on its own is there's not much to talk about. This move is meant to be used in tandem with Eddie. All of his moves are, but this one specifically, there's not too much to talk about if Eddie's not around, but just keep in mind that this move does make you go underground. You're fully invincible while you're traveling underground, so it does have a few use cases, and yes, I should lead with that. You can actually travel around while you're doing this, so you can probably imagine if Eddie is in the mix, this option is going to be pretty strong, and it definitely is. We'll get into that later, but for now, just kind of keep it in the back of your mind that this is a pretty decent attack that Zato can do, but it's much, much better with Eddie. And lastly, there is Damned Fang, also known simply as the command grab. This one's done by inputting DP motion and S. You'll simply command grab the opponent, and it's just as simple as that. There's not too much to say about this. It's a command grab. I will say in the current version of Strive, command grabs aren't as powerful as they used to be. They used to beat regular throws, so it gave them a ton of utility. Now the only utility of it is that it's unbreakable. So if you set it up properly, this is a great option to catch the opponent off guard. It does okay damage, but the main thing is this is used to augment your Eddie gauge. We'll talk a little bit more about that later, but for now, just keep in mind the fact that it is a pretty powerful offensive option because it's a grab that the opponent can't break. Okay, now that we have a pretty good understanding of Zato's movement and special move options, let's go ahead and close it out now by talking about his buttons. Zato has pretty great buttons in just about every category, so let's go ahead and break it down by section, starting with his neutral buttons. First up for neutral buttons, let's talk about 5S. This is just an all-around fantastic poke. There's just a lot of great things about it. It's decently fast. It hits at a really good range. You can see it hits from round start. It actually hits twice. And it has a very high hitbox slash hurt box. So it's very common for this button to attack lower striking buttons, because as you know in this game, usually when an opponent is approaching, they'll either approach with a 6P or a 2S, and most 2S's being lows hit down very low. So the fact that this attack is not very easy to hit with a low strike makes it very valuable. Next up, 2S. This move is good and bad at the same time. It's very good because of the range. As you can see, it hits even further than 5S. This is some fantastic range, and it goes right into Invite Hell and Eddie. Both of these buttons are great pressure starters in general, but the problem with 2S is that it has a pretty bad hurt box on it. The hurt box on the hand that comes out is pretty huge, and it's very easy to crush. So you will be using this to poke at neutral quite a bit just because the range is very tempting, but just keep in mind that it is pretty easy to stuff, so don't just throw it out without thinking. That brings us to 5H. This is the polar opposite of 2S. 5H, while it lacks the range of 2S, it hits from about the same range as 5S, but it has the advantage of being a heavy button. And not only that, it's extremely disjointed. So this button is very, very hard for the opponent to beat out at neutral. So in any situation where the opponent is running up to you to do either a 6P or a 2S, I'd recommend going for 5H because it is extremely likely to win in most scenarios because it's so disjointed. And last but not least, we'll just talk about the universal option. Of course, the 6P. Every character at neutral in this game is going to utilize 6P. Not too much to say here, but one thing I will say is Zato has a fantastic 6P. As you can see, it's huge. It hits up very high, and it's just a all-around fantastic anti-air. When it comes to 6Ps, this is definitely one of the better ones in my opinion. Next up, let's talk about some jump buttons, starting with Jump P. JP is a fantastic air-to-air. It comes out very, very fast, has great range, and hits multiple times. So in situations where the opponent is jumping and you don't want to play the 6P mind game, or you're afraid that they're going to air stall or anything like that, I would highly recommend using JP because it is just so good at taking the opponent out of the air. And as you can see, those multiple hits make it very easy to confirm if you got them or not. And all around, this is just a really reliable button. JS. This is one of your best and most reliable jumping in button. It comes out very quick, has pretty decent block stun, but most importantly of all, it hits omnidirectionally. So it doesn't really matter where the opponent is, this will hit. It's kind of like an attack bubble. So when you're in a scramble and you jump and you use this move, this is his most reliable jumping button because it hits on all sides. So it's very hard for the opponent to actually avoid this. Moving on to JH. This is pretty much just a jump in button. This is used to get your offense started. Earlier we talked about how Zato doesn't have a traditional IED, and that is very much true, but that doesn't mean that he still can't air dash attack. If you jump and press the dash macro and then immediately press an attack button, you can actually do an IED attack very low to the ground. This makes getting in considerably easier with Zato because you don't have as big of a startup animation as other characters do. So it's a little bit easier to sneak these jumping attacks in with him than you would be with another character. That's just another big benefit to his flight mode. And lastly, let's go ahead and talk about probably by far his best jumping attack, and that is Jump Dust. If you jump and press D, he does this lunging bite attack. While it may not look that crazy at first, I gotta tell you, this button is insane. It has dozens of applications. First of all, it basically works like an air dash. When you do this, you cover a lot of distance, and what's amazing about it is you can actually attack on the way down. So if you do this high enough, this functions as a kind of funky IED that again is very unique to Zato. And what makes it even better is this does not take away your flight option. You can do this, fly, and then still do another action on the way down. You can even do it multiple times, fly, and do an action on the way down. As you can see, we talked about Zato's mobility, but especially when you add this button into the mix, his options in the air are honestly just kind of crazy. All right, and to close out this section, let's go ahead and break down his pressure buttons. Starting with 5P. This is your universal challenge button. This is Zato's fastest attack. So whenever you are under pressure and you want to take your turn back, you'll be doing that with 5P. Like most other 5Ps in the game, it chains into itself. So you can tap it a couple of times, you can stagger it, It has really good range and really high speed, so all around really good attack button right there. Similarly, there is 2P. 2P is 1 frame slower than 5P. So 5P is 5 frames, 2P is 6 frames. So keep that in mind when you are challenging. You might have the habit of, you know, when you're blocking low, trying to take your turn back with 2P. I'd recommend trying to just get into the habit of using 5P, because that extra frame could definitely save your life in certain frame traps and situations. But 2P overall is still a good challenge button because it actually hits a little bit further away than 5P does. So that gives it a little bit of an edge. And just like 5P, you can chain it to fish for counters and stuff like that. So both are good pokes. They're both very similar. Both can be chained into 6P and can be canceled into Invite Hell for frame traps. But just remember, if you're really in a dire situation, that 5P is your go-to. And of course, you can't talk about pressure in Guilty Gear Strive without talking about everybody's favorite button, the close slash. There's not too much unique to say about this one. It's a close slash. It's got pretty decent range. It is plus on block like most other close slashes, and it is chainable into his other good buttons like far slash and crouch slash. And these, of course, can be chained into his H. So like most other characters in the game, keep this button in mind when you're going for stagger pressure and throw setups. Next up, let's talk about the win condition button. That is, of course, everyone's favorite, 2K. 2K, again, this is pretty universal, but I will say Zato benefits from this more than, I'd probably say like 90% of the cast, because, of course, 2K chains into 2D, so this gives him a hard knockdown. 2K itself has very good range, sometimes too good, because that right there can happen. So keep that in mind, that his 2K has a lot of pushback and a lot of range. So you do kind of have to be a little bit close to get 2K 2D. So yeah, needless to say, you're going to be poking with this button a lot, and anytime it connects, it's going to be game time. And last but certainly not least, let's go ahead and talk about the GOAT 6H. This button is amazing. So first things first, it is a hopping button, so it does crush lows and a lot of low attacks. If the opponent tries to challenge with like a low jab, this has a very high likelihood of just crushing it completely. When it is blocked, you can air dash off of it. So if the opponent is a little bit asleep at the wheel, you can use this as an extension to extend your turn with plus frames. Because this button is negative on block, but if you actually do get the dash kick here, you actually become plus. So this is a turn steal move. Most opponents, though, are going to try to jab you here, so don't make too much of a habit of going for this. But they do have to react pretty quickly in order to actually jab you. So if they do try to jab and they're late, they'll end up getting counter hit, which again is really good for you. But again, don't make too much of a habit. If the opponent is doing this, you can also dash backwards to negate the situation. You just have a lot of options when you do this. And of course, all of these buttons get crazier when you add Eddie into the mix, but this button specifically is fantastic when Eddie is around. We'll talk about that, you know, when we get to that section, but keep that in the back of your mind. But by far my favorite use case for this button is right here. How many times have you knocked the opponent down, gone for a meaty, and then this happens? It's happened more than once or twice, right? Well, that's where 6H comes in. Because this is a jumping, low crushing button, that's actually not possible for that to happen. So anytime, and this is not just off knockdown, but just anytime you feel like the opponent is trying to mash throw to catch, you know, a button or just to get out of a situation, you can throw out 6H and it is just guaranteed to just crush any throw attempt. And as you can obviously see, it gives you a huge counter, so you get big damage. That's what makes this my favorite button of Zato. All right, and with that, we have covered all the basics of solo Zato. But that's definitely not why you're here. You're here to learn about Zato and Eddie. So let's go ahead and start breaking down all of the basics of the man of the hour, the shadow himself, Eddie. So starting at the very beginning, just like we did for Zato, direct your attention to the bottom left-hand corner of the screen. No, I'm not talking about me. I'm talking about the gauge right there above the super bar. That is the Eddie bar. This dictates basically every option that you're gonna do going forward. How much gauge is in this bar and whether or not Eddie is available is going to decide how you play Zato in any given situation. So when the bar is green like this, it means Eddie is available to be summoned. So when you summon Eddie, it will cost you some of that Eddie gauge, and as you can see, the gauge will slowly tick down as long as Eddie is on the screen. While Eddie is on the screen, you can freely move him around with any of the directional buttons. Pressing forward or backwards will move him around, and you have complete control of him. When the bar is fully spent, you can see the gauge will turn red and have an X over it. This means Eddie is no longer available, and until he becomes available, you can no longer summon him. This is also the case if the opponent attacks Eddie at any time. Eddie literally has 1 HP. If he takes any attack at all, he will pop, and you will have to wait for him to return. We'll definitely go into way more detail about managing your gauge and controlling Eddie and all that stuff, but for now, we're just gonna talk about the actual basics. So now that we understand how the gauge works and what it means and how to slightly control Eddie, let's go ahead and start talking about his actual summons, aka the Eddie special moves. So Eddie has 4 different special moves, all of which are very powerful, starting with 236P, also known as Pierce. This is basically your main Eddie attack. This is the #1 starter and pretty much the best way to get Eddie out on the screen. That is because this move is very, very fast. It covers a lot of distance, and best of all, it is very, very cheap. And no, I don't mean unfair. I mean in terms of cost. Well, I mean, it's a little cheap, but in terms of cost, it is the lowest cost summon that Eddie has available. Each of his 4 special moves drain the meter in a different way, and they all have varying costs. But in terms of Pierce as just a pure special move, think of it as your default projectile. If Zato were a Shoto, Pierce would be his fireball, strictly because of how fast it activates and how far away it hits from. Even from this distance, the opponent has to be careful because it's just that fast and it reaches just that far. Next up, 236S, also known as Leap. This move, as you can probably tell, is meant to be used as an anti-air. When you do this, Eddie turns into a frog and literally leaps off the ground in front of Zato. While it has amazing horizontal range and you can definitely use it on grounded opponents, it really shines if the opponent is actually in the air. I probably don't have to tell you that most of the time in this game, your opponent is probably going to be airborne, especially against Zato because his grounded options are so deadly. Your opponent's going to know that you have the Pierce option, so they're going to try to approach you from the air to avoid it, and that's where Leap comes in. Because if Leap actually connects on an airborne opponent, it is extremely plus. You can see that it fully locks them down, and you have more than enough time to run up to them and start all sorts of offensive sequences. Moving on to 236K. This one is called That's a Lot, but we usually refer to it as the drills. As you can see, this is a very, very powerful neutral tool because it is a long-lasting projectile that takes up a lot of the screen over a long span of time. But the true strength of it is as a lockdown tool. If the opponent is in or near the corner and you use this move, it completely locks them down for a very long time, giving you the opportunity to go for all sorts of crazy mix-ups. And last but absolutely not least, Eddie's 4th special move, 236H, also known as Oppose. A pose summons a shield right behind Zato that slowly moves forward and then attacks. When the shield is up, you are completely invulnerable to most normal attacks. It will literally shield you against the opponent and even allow you to freely counterattack them. The only way for your opponent to beat this is to do either an RC or to simply throw you. So when you put this up, don't be too obvious with it, and definitely don't just stand there, because trust me, everyone you're fighting is just looking for the opportunity to run up and throw you, so don't give it to them for free. All right, so with that, we have covered the basics of Eddie's special moves. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward. However, Zato would not be a 1-star difficulty character if the Eddie gauge was really that simple. There's actually a whole other layer to his summoning mechanic. So we already fully understand that 2, 3, 6 and a button will summon Eddie. For example, here I just did Pierce. What we haven't talked about yet are the clap cancels. So anytime Eddie is summoned or ready to attack, you can do what's called a clap cancel. This is done by simply doing another input while Eddie is out. Ordinarily, if I do Pierce and just leave it alone, Eddie will come out and do 2 stabs. But if I want to cancel Pierce, I can do that anytime by just inputting the next attack. So let's say that I don't want that Pierce to go through, I want to do a leap afterwards. Well, all you have to do is input 2, 3, 6S and Eddie will automatically cancel directly into that attack, whether you make contact or not. As you can probably imagine, this gives Zato an insane amount of utility at neutral and on offense. Because of the fact that any attack can go into any other attack, you can be extremely creative. We talked before about how the drills are good at locking the opponent down in the corner. In most instances, the opponent is just simply not going to be close enough to get the full effect of the drills. However, thanks to clap cancels, you can literally send Eddie forward with a Pierce and then cancel him into the drills. And just like that, you've got the opponent locked down and you are able to rush in on them from full screen. Now, as great as that is, that's not even the biggest benefit. The biggest benefit of a clap cancel is that it comes at a reduced cost. Now, as we talked about many times before, if I do a leap on its own, 50% of my gauge. But if I clap cancel it, considerably less. By properly utilizing these cancels, you can get way more mileage out of the Eddie gauge. When it comes to reducing cost with clap canceling, the star of the show is absolutely oppose. We talked before about how you only get 1 oppose at a time and that completely takes away your Eddie gauge. Not the case when you clap cancel it. This leads to another powerful Eddie option that we haven't talked about yet, and that's simply the act of unsummoning Eddie. Whenever Eddie is out and available, you can unsummon him by inputting 214H. Whenever you do this, it'll put Eddie away and immediately start refilling your gauge. Unsummoning Eddie works exactly like a clap cancel would. Let's say that I do a Pierce, but I don't want both of these attacks to go through. I simply have to unsummon him and he'll stop. Same thing with the drills. This is the key to actually properly managing your Eddie gauge, because you have complete control over when Eddie actually leaves the field. So the main idea is that you want to summon Eddie, utilize clap cancels, and then unsummon him when possible to get your gauge back. That way you don't go into burnout. Okay, so with that, we have 2 different methods of utilizing Eddie's special moves, but there's actually one more method we need to discuss, and it is a big one. But before we get into the specifics, there's also one more Eddie special move we need to talk about, and that is Summon Eddie. This is done by inputting 214H. Once you do this, Eddie is immediately called out and is immediately able to be moved around freely. The benefit to raw summoning Eddie versus doing something like a Pierce is that while Pierce is very good, as we already talked about, it costs meter and it locks Eddie into an attack animation. You're not always going to want to do a certain kind of attack. You're not always going to want to spend your meter. Sometimes you're going to want to be able to get Eddie on the screen with your full meter intact, and that's where this input comes in. Now, once Eddie is on the field, he gains access to attack shortcuts, meaning all of his special moves can be done with a single button press. P becomes Pierce, K does the drills, S will make him leap, and H will make him oppose. Pretty straightforward, but as you probably noticed, there's a small problem here. Both Eddie and Zato are on the screen, so obviously by pressing a button, you're commanding both of them, so they're literally attacking at the same time. This is obviously not always going to be ideal because, for one, you don't want Zato just randomly whiffing buttons, and even if you are close to the opponent, you can mess up your own block strings or even ruin your own mix-up potential. Now, the good news is there's a very powerful method that will prevent this from happening. When Eddie is on the field, he doesn't actually attack when you press a button. He only attacks when you release a button. So as you can see here, I'm going to press 5S again, and this time I'm going to hold it. As you can see, Zato did his 5S and Eddie did nothing. If I let go of 5S now, Eddie does his leap. This is the concept known as negative edge. Negative edge is the entire idea behind Zato and Eddie being able to work as a team, because when you hold a button down, Zato will attack, and then you let the button go and Eddie will follow up. Now that we understand the basic concept of negative edge, let's go ahead and look at an example of why it's so strong and why it's so important for you to master it in order to pilot Zato effectively. So for this example, let's say that we're playing neutral and we want to lock jam down with a leap. If we use the first method that we learned, just simply doing 236S, not far enough. We can't reach her from here. Okay, then what about a clap cancel? Let's do Pierce into leap. That reaches, but as you can see, by the time we get over there, Eddie's dead. We don't get any real pressure out of that. Now this time, let's try the third method, a negative edge. I think we have a winner. As you can see, in one clean motion, I was able to get Eddie across the screen, attack jam, and follow up all before she could counterattack. And from here, I would be able to do a combo on hit, and if she had blocked that, I'd be in the perfect range for a mix-up. This is why negative edge is so incredibly powerful, because it gives you offensive options that wouldn't be regularly possible with a single character. Now, let's revisit the same example and break down step by step how I did this, just so we make sure we're all on the same page. So, first of all, I did summon Eddie, the 214H, and while that animation is happening, I immediately start holding S. As you can see, the animation of Zato snapping his fingers pretty much locks him out of being able to do anything else. I can freely press another button, and since he's pretty much animation locked, or what I like to call busy, he's not going to do anything else, so I'm completely free to hold whatever button that I want. So basically, during Summon Eddie, you want to make it a habit of holding down whatever attack button you want Eddie to follow up with. So Summon Eddie, hold S, and now the next step is to simply move Eddie into position. Once he's close enough, you're going to let go of S so that he'll activate the leap. And during this time, all you want to do with Zato is hit the dash macro. This will allow you to quickly cover the distance while Eddie is doing the leap. And at that point, it's simply 2S to keep the pressure up. As you can see, if utilized properly, negative edge is an extremely powerful tool. This is where all of Zato's complexity and difficulty comes from, just the simple act of mastering negative edge. This was a very simple example that we went over, where we just used one button for negative edge, but the real complexity comes from when you start using multiple buttons. Let's look at a quick example of that as well. So for this example, let's do something a little bit different. This time we'll have Zato start up and Eddie be the follow-up. So for Zato, we'll go ahead and summon Eddie, do a 5S, and then have him follow up our 5S with a Pierce in order to make it plus. So in this example, since Zato was the one starting the offense, we want to hold the button of his attack specifically. So when Eddie is out on the field, I used the dash macro to get closer. Then I did 5S, but I held it. If I had run up and just did 5S like that, Eddie would auto attack and basically mess up my string. So again, that's why it's very important that I actually hold the button down. Now, while Jam is locked in the block stun of that, I'm going to move Eddie forward manually, because remember, Eddie will not move by himself. You have to move him manually every single time. So I move Eddie into position, and then while still holding 5S, I'm going to press 5P. If I do it right, it's going to look like this. Now, the reason this works is, again, because of animation lock. Zato is busy doing his 5S. So once I press 5P, it's not going to come out because Zato can't do a 5S and a 5P at the same time. And Eddie is only going to do whatever I tell him to once I release a button. So because I'm holding 5S and tapping 5P, that's causing Eddie to attack. And since both characters are in the right position with the right timing, it turns into a powerful offensive string. Later on in the guide, we'll definitely go into more complex setups and more complex ways of utilizing negative edge to mix up the opponent and to rush them down. But for now, it's just important that you understand the basic concept of negative edge and the importance of holding down buttons when you need to and releasing buttons when you need to. That way, Eddie and Zato actually work as a team and they're not getting in each other's way. Okay, so now that we have a pretty good understanding of the basics for negative edge, there's only one more thing to talk about in part 1 of this guide, and that is Zato and Eddie's supers. So Zato has 2 supers, both of which are very high utility, and they both cover very important parts of his game plan. Starting with his first super, the sword super, half circle back forward S. Zato literally turns Eddie into a sword and throws him at the opponent. Now, there are a lot of bullet points for this super. The super does a lot of stuff. First of all, let's get the obvious thing out of the way. It is a tracking super. Wherever the opponent currently is on the screen, that is where Zato will throw the sword. So always keep that in mind. Also, as you probably already noticed, since he's literally throwing Eddie at the opponent, it leaves Eddie right on top of the opponent's position. In most instances, the opponent will be able to act first. However, that's not to say that that option is guaranteed. If you throw Eddie and you immediately do oppose, it will usually, if you're fast enough, absorb the opponent's attack so you can run up and pressure them. Now, let's talk about the true strengths of this super. There are 2 things about this super that are insanely strong. Number 1, if your Eddie gauge is empty, this super automatically puts it back to full. That is the number 1 best usage of it, basically spending a bar to immediately get your Eddie back. And number 2, this super activates your win condition, because if you use this to break the wall, not only does it give you Eddie back, but it also puts them in a hard knockdown state, so you get guaranteed Eddie pressure on their wake up after breaking the wall. And his second super, half circle back forward H, is the shark. When you activate this, Eddie will literally turn into a shark. He'll travel to the opponent's location and bite them. Now, a couple of things about this super. It is not invincible on startup, but it does work pretty well as a sort of fake reversal. I say fake because as long as you actually get it out, it doesn't matter if the opponent hits you, because Eddie will still bite them. But the main draw of this super, you probably already noticed, is just the damage. If you're going for the kill, this will be the super that you use because it does a ton of damage, especially on wall break. And it also gives a hard knockdown. So basically, it's sword super in any situation where you need to get Eddie back. But if Eddie is already available, then shark super is your go-to. All right, so with that, we have covered all the basics of Zato's kit, including Eddie and all his special moves, using the gauge, and even negative edge. So now let's go ahead and move on to part 2 of the guide, where we take all that information and learn how to actually apply it to real matches. Before we jump into any of the specifics, let's first talk about Zato's general strategy. Basically, what is the mindset you should have during a match with Zato? Now, as we've talked about many times, Zato is a very malleable character. He's got a lot of options. He's very complex, and he is a 1-star difficulty character on the character select screen. He's obviously very hard. But one thing that's actually kind of simple and straightforward about him is his game plan. His general strategy is basically to get Eddie on the opponent's block. Yeah, that's it. Once the opponent is forced to block Eddie, it allows Zato to go on the offensive, and his overwhelming offense and incredible mix-up pressure is basically his key to victory. So from this point, we'll cover each aspect of the match, from neutral to offense to Oki and all that good stuff. And in each of those sections, we'll break down the best way to trigger your win condition, which once again is just getting Eddie on the opponent's block. So the first section we'll cover will be the neutral. Neutral, of course, being the moment where neither you or the opponent have a clear advantage. Neutral always starts when the round starts and doesn't end until one of you gets the upper hand. For starters, let's talk about Zato first, then we'll talk about Zato with Eddie. We touched on it briefly in part 1, but I just want to reiterate that the ability to control your movement in the air in this game, I really can't say enough about how strong this is as a concept. To give a quick and simple example, if you do something like jump in on your opponent to get your offense started, most players know the timing of this, and it's very easy for them to react and counter you accordingly with a 6P or whatever anti-air they choose. Now, what makes Zato unique is that the option of utilizing a 6P is not as strong against him as it is against other characters. This is because after a jump, you have the option of floating. And because you can float, you can make their 6P whiff, which means that if you time your flight properly, you can even punish them for trying to anti-air you. Not to mention, as we briefly touched on in part 1 of the guide, he also has a very unorthodox air dash that can catch a lot of opponents off guard and is a bit harder to 6P than other jump-ins. This is why his movement was one of the first things we talked about earlier in the guide, because it's very important to have good control over his flight. The ability to be able to move forward, but still move backwards, and then move forwards, stay in one position, or even fast fall are all so incredibly strong because it just gives you a lot of utility in the air. Once you get comfortable enough, there's a lot of ways you can bait out anti-airs. Also, make sure you don't forget to work in jump dust with your general flight movement. Once again, when you use this move, you're not locked out of air actions on the way down, so you can use this as an air dash and still attack on the way down. You can even use it multiple times, and if you still choose to, you could fly away or go on the attack. There really isn't much of a limit to what you can do in the air with this character, so always keep that in mind. When it comes to neutral, you just don't want to be repetitive or predictable, and this is an area where Zato really excels because the amount of options you have here is going to make it very hard for the opponent to predict where you're going to land or how you're going to approach. Now, when you're actually planted on the ground, you're going to be wanting to fish with your primary neutral buttons. We talked about those in the earlier part of the guide. It's mainly going to be 2S, 5S, 5H, and 6P. These are going to be your go-to neutral buttons. All of these can be canceled directly into Eddie for immediate pressure. And the last neutral tool we're going to talk about for solo Zato is, of course, Invite Hell. This is without a doubt Zato's strongest neutral tool when he's by himself, simply due to the fact of how fast it comes out and how much space it controls. Invite Hell always comes out at the exact same distance from where Zato is standing, So it's very important that you get used to where it actually spawns. And the most important thing you need to get used to is where the edge of the attack hits. Where the attack hits is very important because it's going to decide how much frame advantage you get if the opponent actually blocks it. So to demonstrate this, I went ahead and turned the frame counter on. Now you can see if I am right next to Jam or very close to her here, and I do invite hell, -7. So it's pretty negative. My turn is completely over. And at this range, it's going to be hard for me to really do anything if she decides to attack. But if I'm a little bit further away, you can see it's only -1. Even further away, +3. So when you're using this at neutral, you want to try to aim for that edge of the projectile to hit. That way you end up being plus rather than negative. Now, keeping that in mind, what is the best situation to poke with Invite Hell? In my opinion, the best way to utilize it is to prevent opponents from advancing on you. One of the best aspects of this attack is simply just how much screen space it takes up for a couple of seconds. It's really great at buying you time, especially if your eddy gauge is withered down and you're just trying to basically stall until your eddy gauge comes back so you can get your offense going. Invite Hell is incredibly good at that, especially again if you hit that nice range where it becomes plus. But even if you don't, it can create a sort of barrier that is very hard for the opponent to cross without resorting to jumping. Now, with that being said, that leads us to the biggest weakness of Invite Hell, and that is the opponent jumping. This move does have a pretty good amount of recovery if the opponent doesn't interact with it at all. So be careful not to just throw it out predictably, because if the opponent does jump over it, you're going to eat a lot of damage. So my recommendation for Invite Hell is to simply keep an eye on your opponent's habits. If they like to approach more on the ground and utilize their grounded buttons to lock you down and get their offense started, this is a situation again where Invite Hell is very strong, because basically it creates a sort of barrier that they just can't get around. And usually once you introduce this option as a threat and your opponent has a hard time getting around it, that's when they're going to start jumping at you, and that's where your anti-airs come into play. Now, if you're having trouble discerning which is which, or you can't get a read on your opponent, you're not sure if they like to jump or they like to dash, that's where your tension gauge comes in to sort of lighten the load. Once you get one single bar of tension, Invite Hell becomes 10 times better of a poke, because it then becomes completely safe. For one thing, you no longer have to properly space it for it to be plus. If you want to go in, you can do it. If it's blocked, you can immediately go in and be extremely plus. And when it comes to fishing with Invite Hell at neutral, you no longer have to worry about what if they jump over it, because if you have a bar and they do jump over it, you can simply RC and save yourself. All right, so now that we have a really good understanding of how Zato's neutral works when he's alone, let's now start talking about how his neutral changes when we also add Eddy to the mix. Basically, everything we just talked about still applies, but now Eddy adds even more layers to Zato's many neutral options. All 4 of Eddy's basic special moves have really strong neutral applications, so let's go ahead and break those down one by one. Starting with Pierce. This again is your go-to neutral attack. Think of it as your basic projectile. Because of the fact that it comes out so fast and reaches so far, this is pretty much the best way to quickly and easily get Eddy on the opponent's block. Now, there's something about Pierce that I haven't mentioned earlier in the guide because it wasn't time yet, but now that we've reached this point, there's something very important that we have to talk about when it comes to putting Pierce on an opponent's block. Now, due to the nature of Pierce, of it being a 2-part attack, there is a gap in between the 2 stabs, and that gap is actually big enough that the opponent can hit a button, and if their timing is right, they will actually counter hit Eddy before the second slash comes out. Once you fight more experienced players that know the matchup, they're pretty much going to go for this almost every time because it is a free Eddy kill. Anytime they actually get the timing right, Eddy is dead, and that's going to put Zato back into solo neutral mode, but it's not what we want. We want Eddy to be alive so we can actually get that win condition of rushing the opponent down with Eddy behind us. Now, the fact that the opponent can do that would be a huge problem if clap cancels didn't exist. That's why we talked about clap cancels earlier in the guide, because if you actually clap cancel, the pierce goes from a guaranteed hit to something that is actually very dangerous for the opponent to try to challenge. Simply by interrupting the follow-up with any of his other options, you can really keep the opponent on their toes. From a distance, pierce into the drills works very, very well, because as long as Eddie isn't too close like this, most characters' jabs are going to completely whiff, and it's very likely they'll get picked up for a full combo. If Eddie is kind of close, another option that is totally safe and very effective is you can immediately cancel into oppose. From here, you have the option of doing just about anything you want. If you're close enough, you can run up and do a button. Or you can just simply clap cancel the oppose into any other attack that you want. Now, once you introduce these clap cancels after pierce, it's unlikely that your opponent is going to keep challenging that situation, so that's when we start to move on to the other layers. It's likely that at that point, they're going to either start simply blocking or trying to jump out of your pressure. If they do start jumping, this is where clap canceling into leap becomes extremely effective. And if they start blocking, this is where canceling into drills becomes effective. When it comes to piloting Eddie, I can't really stress enough how important it is to actually pay attention to your opponent's tendencies and just make sure you're not being repetitive or predictable, because you have so many options at hand that it's very easy to rotate between them and keep things unpredictable. That way, it's always going to keep your opponent on their toes, and they're never going to be sure which angle you're going to be attacking them from. Next up, let's talk about leap. This is probably Zato's second best way of getting his offense started. It doesn't have the range that Pierce does, but the fact that it functions as both a plus move and an anti-air just makes it incredibly reliable. Because again, this is a game where most of the time your opponent is going to be attacking from the air, especially if you're controlling the ground with Pierce. Most opponents do not want to engage with Pierce, and once they see that you're using it to start your offense, that's when they're going to start, double jumping and trying to ID in on you. Simply put, leap is just a great way of bringing the opponent from the air to the ground. Next up, the drills. Now, the drills are quite different from either Pierce or Leap. Both Pierce and Leap are sort of direct offense attacks. You use them in tandem to basically lock the opponent down. Again, if they're on the ground, Pierce. Leap if they're in the air. The reason these two moves work so well as offense starters is because they lunge Eddie forward. When Eddie lunges forward, you can move forward and get into the ideal range of getting your pressure sequences going. The difference with drills, however, as you probably noticed, is Eddie doesn't go anywhere. He actually stays directly behind you while taking up a considerable portion of the screen. This makes drills more of a passive attack and sort of a space control tool. Once you do this, it puts a lot of pressure on the opponent from a distance. If they're within range of this, 9 times out of 10, they're gonna try to move away, because honestly, nobody wants to block the drills because they're so incredibly plus. And honestly, this isn't much of a problem because Eddie is directly behind us when we do this move, so it's very, very easy to desummon him, get all our meter back, and be able to either do it again or simply choose another option. So one of the best uses for drills is to simply just use it to control the space in front of you. If your opponent ends up blocking it, you can immediately move in for pressure. But if it doesn't make contact, you have plenty of time to either try to A, move Eddie in, move in yourself, or even utilize clap cancels. I mentioned before how backing off and trying to get out of range of the drills is one of the most popular options your opponent is likely to choose. The other really popular option, like with most projectile attacks, is your opponent is also extremely likely to try and jump over it. This is a decent option for the opponent, but it's not the best. In order for the jump to actually hit you, they have to be relatively close in order to actually jump over the spikes. And not only that, they have to be relatively close to hit you in the recovery. If they're a decent distance away, they might not reach you before the spikes hit them, or you might just recover before they get a chance to even attack. And my personal favorite way to deal with this is to meet them air to air with a JP. This works fantastically well because it's basically like an option select. Once the drills are out, if you use JP, it's going to put you in the air and you're going to land where the drills are. So again, it's very hard for the opponent to actually hit you out of this. And if they do end up jumping, you'll knock them down into the drills. And because you were holding P once you let it go, that'll automatically cause Eddie to pierce. This ends up being a very clean sequence that can get your offense started. And now the last Eddie neutral tool for us to talk about is Oppose. Now, when it comes to using Oppose at neutral, it can be kind of tricky because we talked about this in part 1. Oppose as a tool is really, really strong, but at this stage of the game, everybody knows how to counter it. So you don't want to get in the habit of just being at neutral and just calling Oppose and just standing there and waiting for something to happen, because first of all, that's a waste of your Eddie gauge, and second of all, 9 times out of 10, the opponent is going to see this and they're just going to run up and throw you. You probably don't need me to tell you that in this game, people want to run up and throw you anyway. You don't want to give them any extra excuses. So when it comes to utilizing Oppose, you have to be very smart with it and you got to be a little sneaky. It's best utilized in situations where you have a feeling the opponent is actually going to attack. That way you actually get to benefit from its amazing armor properties. If you do end up using Oppose preemptively, my recommendation is to at least try to cancel it into something that won't burn all your bar. One of the best options, in my opinion, is to either cancel it back into itself. That way you still have the option of unsummoning Eddie, or if you summon it, you don't feel like your opponent's going to take the bait, you can always go directly into drills and start utilizing options that we already talked about from there. To summarize, when it comes to controlling Eddie at neutral, you want to pick the right move for the right situation. And one thing I do want to stress is don't try to rush it. I know I said that getting Eddie on the opponent's block is the win condition, but that doesn't mean you have to chase the opponent down. You have a lot of ways of controlling the screen. You have a lot of ways of poking from a distance, and you have ways of slowing the opponent down if they try to attack you. So there's no reason for you to just be in full rushdown mode. One of the best ways to play Zato is to play aggressive, but patiently aggressive. Use your floats to get into the proper ranges, bait out anti-airs, get into the right space where you can actually get a button out and get Eddie on their block. Utilize things like the drills or Oppose to slow them down. And then when you get into a decent range, use your pierce, your clap cancels, and your leap to get them into a desirable position before you actually commit to actually rushing them down. Okay, so we have covered a lot of ground so far. Now we know how to play neutral with Zato, and we know how to play neutral with Eddie. Now for the third and final step, we're going to add another layer on top of everything we just talked about, and that is, of course, utilizing negative edge at neutral. Applying negative edge on top of all the things we've already discussed makes Zato's neutral even more powerful, and it gives you even more options. So we talked at length about how all of Eddie's moves are very strong at neutral and what situations to use them in. I mentioned before, by utilizing negative edge, I can summon Eddie, hold S during the activation of this move, and now that I'm holding S, all I gotta do is play neutral with Eddie, move him into position, let go of the button, and boom, I have a leap on the opponent's block right away. And just like that, I'm in. Summon Eddie is very, very strong at neutral because of all the things we talked about before. We just talked about how you don't want to be predictable with a pose, and it's best utilized preemptively when the opponent is actually going to attack. Well, there's no better example of this than utilizing negative edge with Eddie. If Eddie is already out, you have the ability to simply hold H, and when you see an attack coming, let it go, and boom. This is even faster and more reliable than trying to hit 236H right before the opponent can hit you. You simply have to let the button go before the opponent attacks, and boom, you have an oppose. When you get really comfortable, you can take this even further by combining everything we talked about, even Zato's neutral. For example, you can cover a large portion of the screen and protect him with Invite Hell, and as long as you don't let go of the button, Eddie won't attack, which means you can both augment their strengths and cover their weaknesses. My main recommendation for utilizing negative edge at neutral is to already have an idea of what Eddie attack you want to do before you summon them. Anytime that you do the summon Eddie input, get it into your muscle memory to hold down the button of the attack you want Eddie to do beforehand. And if you're already holding one button, but you change your mind and you want to do a completely different Eddie attack, there is a neat trick you can use to pull this off. So, for example, let's say that I summon Eddie and I hold H because I want to oppose. I'm waiting for the opportunity to oppose, but my opponent is not taking the bait. They're not coming anywhere near me. So at this point, I want to switch over to a leap. That way I can get my offense started while they're just, trying to wait out Eddie's gauge over there. If I'm already holding H because I wanted to oppose, all I have to do is press back and the attack button of the new move I want to do, which in this case is leap, so I press S. And when I do that, Zato is going to barrier block. So by doing this, I'm stopping Zato from attacking, and I'm able to hold a second button down. So putting that all together, if I summon Eddie and I'm holding H to oppose, but I change my mind, all I gotta do is move him into position like normal, but press back and S. And for just a moment, Zato will barrier block. As you can see, once you get this down, no whipped buttons, no lost frame advantage. You get the best of both worlds, and it really helps you maximize your control of Eddie. Now, the last thing I want to cover for this section is how two very specific special moves interact with Eddie in the neutral space. We mentioned before how both Zato's Reflect and Break the Law become stronger when Eddie is around. For the Reflect, the greatest strength of it, besides reflecting projectiles, is it can actually push Eddie across the screen. This becomes incredibly effective if you actually negative edge him, because just like we talked about before, once he's out, you can reflect him, hold a button down, and then he'll usually be either next to or behind the opponent, and once you release the button, he'll instantly be able to attack him. This has a lot of use cases. One of the most popular is to throw out a pose. If nothing is happening, use the Reflect to take Eddie directly to the opponent and then let him attack from there. It also works really well with the drills. But the downside to this is if your opponent is ready for it, they can almost always jab Eddie on reaction. So because of that, I wouldn't recommend using this too frequently. In a lot of cases, if you autopilot with this, you're basically just feeding Eddie to your opponent. Once in a while, it can be good, but 9 times out of 10, in my opinion, you should stick to clap cancels, because clap cancels basically do the same thing, just a lot safer. Doing something like this is much safer than doing this. Both good options, but I would recommend reflecting Eddie very sparingly. Now, the last interaction is Eddie with Break the Law. A few patches ago, they actually turned Break the Law into a full-on teleport. So if Eddie is on the screen and you activate Break the Law, you can press down, down, and Zato will automatically teleport to Eddie's location. This is really strong for any situation where Eddie makes contact with the opponent and is kind of far away from you, because instead of having to run all the way across the screen to try to get your frame advantage, you can simply just teleport. Just like with everything else, this becomes 10 times more effective when you use it with negative edge, because again, since you're not locked in any sort of animation, you can teleport instantly and get even more frame advantage than off of a clap cancel. Okay, so with that, we have finally covered all the aspects of Zato's neutral. We should have a really good understanding now of how to actually get Eddie on the opponent's block. So now it's time to move on to the next section, what we actually do when the opponent blocks Eddie. This is where we start finally breaking down Zato's offense. So much like Zato's neutral, his offense is incredibly layered, and there are a ton of different options on the table once the opponent actually blocks Eddie. Let's go ahead and, just like with the other sections, take this step by step. The first thing I want to talk about is the actual Eddie gauge. Now, in my opinion, the single most important aspect of structuring your pressure and mix-ups with Zato is properly managing your Eddie gauge. This is because the Eddie gauge literally dictates how many mix-ups and interactions you're going to get before Eddie goes on cooldown. Once Eddie goes on cooldown, Zato's offense basically becomes halved, and he has to rely on button staggers, throws, or backing off and going back to neutral until Eddie is available. This is why we want to optimize our usage of the gauge. That way we get as many turns as possible before Eddie pops, which means we get way more chances to actually open the opponent up. Let's look at some examples. So let's say we're at neutral and I end up getting the opponent to block a leap. So leap costs 50% of my Eddie gauge. Let's say in this example, after the leap, I run up and do a dust, and then I follow that dust up with another leap. Now, if the opponent blocks this, I still get another turn because leap is so plus. However, that was only one mix-up, and then after that, I'm forced to simply go into stagger, wait it out for Eddie to come back territory. But what would happen if I use Pierce instead? As you can see here, if the opponent ends up blocking my dust, Eddie is going to follow me up. I'll become plus again after the Pierce, and I still have Eddie available to go for another mix-up. So just because I used Pierce instead of Leap there, that gave me the opportunity to go for 2 mixes instead of just 1. This is the basic idea behind how you want to structure your Zato offense. The way I would describe it is you have an opener, that being the attack that gets the opponent to block. Then you have the bridge. This is your first mix-up that Eddie is going to follow you up on. And then you have your ender. This is the mix-up that you go for with your last bit of Eddie gauge. And the best part about maximizing your turns in this way is that if you actually do get the hit, it's incredibly rewarding because you get the option of either going for a combo or resetting back into even more pressure. So as you can see, it's extremely beneficial to get as much as you can out of the Eddie gauge. Simply put, the more turns you get, the more opportunities you have to open your opponent up. So in this section, we'll break down a bunch of different examples of openers, bridges, and enders. And by the end of this section, you should have a pretty wide arsenal to draw from. And once you start mixing and matching all these options together, it's going to be very, very hard for most opponents to defend themselves. All right, so starting with mid-screen options, let's go over some examples of good mid-screen openers. Starting with Pierce, one of my favorites and go-to is, of course, Pierce into drills. We talked a little bit about this earlier, but this is a very good option that is very hard to counter. If the opponent tries to jab the follow-up Pierce, the drills can end up completely carrying them away into a confirmable combo. And if they just sit there, you get pressure anyway. So this is one of the most popular ways of getting your offense started, especially if you're within range of that first Pierce. Next up, Pierce into leap. We talked a lot about why this one's so strong. Basically, once your opponent has been conditioned to block, they might start jumping, and Pierce into leap is great to cover both of those options. Next up, just leap by itself. You don't even need to clap cancel anything. Once the opponent blocks leap, you have the option of either teleporting over to get pressure or running up and starting your offense from there. Leap is just so strong on its own that you can always go from leap directly into the bridge. Okay, so now that we have some reliable openers to work with, let's go ahead and move on to the second part, also known as the bridge. The reason I call it the bridge is because it literally bridges the gap between the opener and the ender. The fun thing about the bridge is it doesn't really matter whether or not the opponent blocks it, because if they do end up blocking whatever you do during the bridge, your ender will give you a second mix-up opportunity. But if your mix-up actually does connect during the bridge, you have the option of your ender becoming a combo opportunity. So let's go ahead and start breaking down some bridge examples. For this section, we'll start off with really easy examples that just about anyone should be able to pull off. But as we go, we'll go with the more layered and advanced mix-up setups. So the first and most basic mix-up option is, of course, going to be Tap Dust. Tap Dust is the universal mix-up in this game. It comes out very fast and can definitely catch an opponent off guard if they're not directly looking for it in that moment. And honestly, with Zato, it's a little bit more effective than with most other characters, because he literally has the added benefit of having two characters on the screen at once. So while Eddie is doing his thing, it's not very difficult to sneak a dust in while the opponent is distracted, because there's a lot of visual noise on the screen while Eddie is attacking. So the opponent has to really focus up to see those dusts coming from Zato specifically. So once you use the opener of your choice, for this example, we'll just use Pierce into drills. All you really want to do at that point is run up to the opponent, hit the dust as soon as the drills are done, and then from there we would go directly into Pierce to either keep our turn or pick up the combo confirm. Very similar to Tap Dust, you can also use Sweep in this exact same situation. If the opponent is blocking high, Eddie will pick them up for a combo, and if they're blocking low, you get to keep your turn. Both of these options are good for beginner Zato players because it doesn't require you to negative edge. Because of the fact that Eddie does not react at all when you press dust, you don't have to worry about having him do an attack that you don't want and end up wasting any of your gauge. Now let's talk about some more layered bridge options, starting with Close Slash. Close Slash is a fantastic bridge option because it chains directly into both Tap Dust and Sweep. So the examples that we just showed get a little bit stronger because now you can actually stagger them out with a button in between. And of course, because Close Slash is a great stagger button and it's plus, you can even go for a throw setup here. Similar to Close Slash, you can also use 2K. It works very similarly, except it is a straight up low option, and it chains into 2K 2D, which is a hard knockdown that Eddie can also combo off of, or 2K 5D, which goes directly from a low to an overhead. Next button I want to talk about is 6H. This is the big one. Honestly, this is probably the best button to use in general when Eddie is available. We mentioned much earlier in the guide that anytime 6H is blocked, you have the option of canceling it into an air dash for extended pressure. However, we also talked about how this is not at all guaranteed, and the opponent can jab you out of this. When Eddie is in the mix, this is no longer the case. So as you can see, simply by pressing 6H and then letting go of the button once Eddie is near me, you can literally cover your air dash with an oppose. Because of this, your opponent basically has to take the mix-up, and from this situation, you get a pretty amazing amount of mix-ups. The first and most obvious being you can just go for an overhead. You can fast fall and do an empty low. Or even fast fall directly into a throw. The only caveat for using this option during the bridge is that obviously it will use up the rest of your meter, so you don't get a third interaction. But in this case, I feel like that's okay just because of how many options are on the table. And if you end up going for the command grab, you end up getting Eddie back anyway. And if you get one of these mix-ups to land, because of how many hits opposes, it's very likely that you'll break the wall. So I don't think it's the worst idea to go all in on this option once you get them locked down. Normally, I would recommend saving it as an ender because in my opinion, this is by far the best ender just because, again, there's so many mix-up options there on the table. But when you're first starting out and you don't have all of the more advanced negative edge setups down, this is a very easy and effective way to open the opponent up. Now, another strong way to utilize 6H as a bridge, which is a little bit more tricky. This option is a bit more advanced, so if you can't do this right away, don't worry about it. I'm literally just giving you this information so you can use it when you're ready. Don't feel like you have to use it right away. But another great option is to use 6H into Pierce. By the time 6H connects on the opponent's block, Eddie should be close enough to do a Pierce, and this will extend your block string pressure even further. What's better about this than simply doing something like a 5S or a 2K is that, again, you can go airborne. So if we take that step that we just looked at and then add an air dash on top, we get pretty strong, right? So right there, we're going from 6H to air dash, and Eddie is still doing Pierce. So if they do block the overhead air dash kick here, we're still extremely plus because Eddie is still in the middle of his attack, and we can go cleanly into our ender from there. But again, because we're airborne, we also have the option of immediately going low as well. A little trick that makes this setup easier is once you do 6H, you want to continue holding forward and the H, obviously, because if you let go, Eddie is going to misfire and go directly into oppose. So you never want to let go of forward and 6H. Now, to get the dash and the oppose to come out at the same time, you can simply tap the dash macro and P together, and it will perfectly time Eddie to cover the gap after your 6H. So as you can see there, if you look at my buttons at the bottom, as soon as my 6H connects, I'm hitting the buttons, and Eddie is immediately lunging forward with his Pierce. The reason this works so well is because during the startup of the dash, Zato is not available to actually do the P, so you don't have to worry about holding P, which means that the only button in this scenario that you actually have to hold is the HS. And again, once you get the dash, that's when you actually go for your mix-up. Now, the last thing I want to say about the bridge is that you don't necessarily have to go for a mix-up here. If you want to just go for an extended pressure sequence that pushes the opponent near the corner, that's a good option too. Okay, so with that, we now have a nice variety of opener options, which get Eddie on the opponent's block, bridge options, which either pushes the opponent towards the corner or attempts to open them up. Now it's time to bring it all together with some ender options. When it comes to enders, you can think of them as the bridge part 2 because they're very similar. The key difference though is that you don't actually have to hold back anymore, because by time you get to the ender, you're gonna have a very small percentage of eddy gauge left. So at that point, it's okay for you to cash it out with any attack of your choosing. Let's take Tap Dust, for example. Now, I hinted at it a bit before, but the number one option I would recommend as an ender is, of course, 6H. 6H just works so amazingly well here because, again, it's incredibly potent, and even though you usually only have about 5% of your eddy gauge left, you still get the full utility of oppose. A somewhat special ender option I wanted to highlight here is to simply go for a throw. Now, ordinarily you wouldn't consider going for a throw a special option, especially after throws got nerfed in the 2.0 update. Probably aware by now, but it's no longer possible to RC a whiffed grab. So if you go for a grab and the opponent backdashes or jumps out of it, you are extremely punishable. In most cases, however, this isn't always the case for Zato. Simply put, because negative edge exists, Zato is one of the few characters who can still go for throws and make them safe on whiff. This works even better with his command grab, because not only is the command grab unbreakable, and not only does it give you back your entire eddy gauge, but you're already holding S, so all you have to do is let go of the S to cover your command grab with a leap. When it comes to corner openers, I would stick to two main options. The first one being leap. 9 times out of 10, when you have the opponent in the corner in this game, they're going to be jumping, especially against Zato because they don't want to be mixed to death. But however, by jumping in the corner, all they're doing is making it easier for you to lock them down with leap. If they block leap in the air, you are incredibly plus, so you can go directly into the bridge from there. And if they end up stand blocking it, it hits twice, so again, it's incredibly plus. And if they crouch block it, it's still very, very plus. So honestly, I would say leap is stronger in the corner than it is mid-screen, because it doesn't matter whether they get hit by it or they block it. You're going to either be able to convert it into a big combo on hit or directly into pressure on block. The next and definitely most potent opener I'd recommend for the corner is without a doubt the drills. If we turn the frame data on for a second, we can see that if they block all of the drills, you end up being plus 55. Obviously at plus 55, you have pretty much the option of doing any mix-up that you want. Moving on to bridge options. Again, you can use any of the options we talked about in the mid-screen section. They all work here. Now let's talk about some new bridge options. Once again, because we have the opponent in the corner and we don't have to chase them down, we can take advantage of the close proximity to get even better mix-up options. The first is a personal favorite of mine, and I swear the hit rate on this is like a 95%. Using the drills as the opener, while the drills are going on, all you have to do is jump at the opponent, just a regular jump, not a super jump, not a float, nothing else, just a regular jump, and as soon as you hit the ground, do a 2K. This is known as an empty low option. The reason this is so strong is because whenever you jump, the opponent is always going to stand up and they're going to be waiting for you to do a button on the way down. And that split second where they haven't registered that you already landed is where you tag them with the 2K. And once the 2K connects, you can go directly into 2D and then combo off of it with Pierce. Now, anytime you represent a low option for the opponent, you have to also represent an overhead option, otherwise they're just going to block low every time. And this is where the empty low becomes truly devious, because once the opponent tries to start blocking low preemptively to stop you from doing that mix-up, that's when you hit them with a very difficult to react to overhead. The overhead in this scenario is actually, believe it or not, jumping dust. So the way this works is that you want to jump forward, and right before you hit the ground, you want to press dust. The reason why this works is because the dust hits at basically the exact same frame that an empty low would. So this makes it a very powerful 50-50. And once that dust actually connects or is blocked, you guessed it, go directly into Pierce. Now, the caveat to note about this, air dust into Pierce is not a true combo. As you saw right there, I hit Jam with the overhead. Eddie stabbed her, but she's not in a launched or stunned state, so she's able to block. So when you do this option, you got to make sure when you land, you either do a 2P or a 2K. I'd recommend doing 2K to actually make this turn into a natural combo. If you connect the 2K properly, as you can see, it'll pop them up in the air, and this gives you the option to go for a juggle or a reset. The only thing that makes this setup a little bit difficult is properly timing the jump dust. It does have to be pretty precisely timed. If you jump and just do it, you can end up biting over the opponent's head, and obviously that's not going to work as a mix-up. You don't ever want to whiff. You do have to get the timing down of pressing it right before you hit the ground in order for it to actually be an overhead. If you are having a lot of trouble with this, there is a trick you can use to make it a little bit easier. You can do what's called a frame kill. A frame kill is when you use one whiffed button to set up another button. In this instance, it would be JP. If you do JP immediately, by the time you recover, you can do JD, and in that window, the JD will always be the perfect height. It's basically not possible to do JD at the wrong height because you don't recover until you're at the perfect height. And what's kind of diabolical about this is that if the opponent sees you doing this, they might think that you're going for the JD, but you don't have to do anything. So you can still do JP empty low, and both options look exactly identical. So it doesn't even hurt your mix-up, and it makes the mix-up easier. So Yeah, use this if you're having any trouble getting that timing down. Now there's one more high-low bridge mix-up we can cover. It's very similar to the empty jump 2K and the falling dust, but it's a little bit more on the advanced side. For this one, your negative edge is going to have to be pretty on point. So if you can't do this one right away, don't worry about it. The mix-up that we just went over is potent enough to get you out of the way for most encounters. But if you want to spice up your mix-ups even more, this next option is really, really strong. So for this one, you're going to want your opener to be the drills. And while the opponent is blocking the drills, you're going to very quickly, timing is the key here. You want to very, very quickly neutral jump, hit the dash macro, and then S. So if you time it properly, you'll end up doing a very fast air dash slash. You'll know you got the timing right if you actually get the air dash and Eddie doesn't do a command. If you do it too slow, Eddie is going to leap. Now, the next part of the mix-up is pretty straightforward. From here, you want to do a low 2K. Now, this is the part that you actually have to negative edge, because by the time you get to the 2K, Eddie's going to be waiting for a command. So once you land, you're going to hit 2K, you're not going to let go of it, and then you're going to press P. So at that point, you can transition directly into the ender of your choice if the opponent ends up actually blocking this. Now, if they end up getting hit, just like with the jump dust example, you are going to have to hit another button to actually combo off of Pierce here. Now, this by itself might not look like much of a mix-up, but what we're about to learn next is what makes it very, very devious. So once the opponent is conditioned to block low after your jump S into 2K, that's going to condition them to block low. That's when you introduce the overhead. Once the air dash slash connects, you have about a second to input dust, and this will do the delayed overhead that we talked about earlier. So because the opponent is expecting you to land and do a 2K, 9 times out of 10, they're going to block, especially because you're so low to the ground when the S comes out, and then that's when they get hit by the overhead. And when you put it all together with Eddie, it should look like this. And by now, I probably don't have to tell you that you're going to follow this up with Pierce. And to actually get the combo, just like with the other example, once you land, you're going to do 2K. Moving on to corner enders, just like with the bridges, pretty much all the enders we already talked about work just as well in the corner. Honestly, the number one ender I would still recommend would be 6H. I feel like it's way stronger in the corner than it is mid-screen, just due to the fact that, again, there's nowhere for the opponent to go. Okay, so with all of that put together, we should have more than enough pressure options both mid-screen and in the corner. But there's one more mix-up situation that we haven't talked about that is pretty important to Zato as a character, and that is, of course, sandwiches. When it comes to Zato and Eddie's pressure, a sandwich is any situation where Zato is on one side and Eddie is on the other. There is one pretty consistent way to set them up off of Pierce. It's really ideal to have the opponent block a button first. I'd recommend 5H for this. Now we know letting Pierce go through without canceling it leaves it open to being jabbed. One way to prevent this that we haven't yet covered is to use the reflect. If you time the reflect properly after the first pierce, then it will knock Eddie behind the opponent and cause their challenge button to whiff completely. Because both Zato and Eddie are stuck in animations during this, you don't have to hold the S or the P. Now, once Eddie is successfully behind the opponent, the pressure sequence will generally follow the same idea as all the other sequences we talked about. You're gonna have your opener, which is obviously this. Then you will have your bridge and your ender. For the sandwich bridge, I would recommend a simple 2K. 2K is extremely effective here because first of all, it is a low attack, but the best part of it is it fills the gap between the pierce when Eddie starts to pierce from behind. So in this situation right here, since we are +4, we have a lot of different options. The simplest of which is to just go for a throw. The 5S chains also work really well right here too. And as you can probably guess, this is the bridge, so this leads to the ender, and for the ender, you have the option of doing any of the bridge options once again. And the final sandwich mix-up that we're going to cover is a little bit more on the advanced side. You do have to have your negative edge timing perfectly, and your spacing has to be completely perfect. But if you land it, this is one of the coolest mix-ups that Zato has in his entire arsenal. So for this one, the opener is going to be the same as usual, the pierce into reflect setup. Now, when you get to this point where you have your plus frames and Eddie is still right behind them, you're going to do 2K into 6P. The 2K you don't have to hold because Eddie is still busy with the pierce, so the 2K is free, but you do have to hold the 6P. Now, what makes this kind of easy is that P is the button that we need to let go of to make Eddie attack. So you're gonna hold forward and P, and once Eddie backs up slightly, you're gonna let go of P, and then you're immediately gonna do break the law. And the final step is once you do break the law, you're gonna hold forward once again, and this is gonna cause you to do an underground cross-up. The best way to show an example of the full setup is to record the computer doing it and then try to block it yourself. So as you can see here, I've already recorded Zato doing the setup, so now I'm going to press play and I'm just going to hold down back. So that was a true cross-up because I did not switch my block, therefore I ended up getting launched. And what's really diabolical about this mix-up is that it is multi-layered, much like all of Zato's mix-ups, but this one's multi-layered in a funny way. Once you introduce this option and your opponent knows that you might go for it, you can mix it up even further by doing break the law and not actually moving behind them. So in that situation, instead of going forward, I actually went backward and stayed on the same side. So right there, if they switch their block, they're still gonna get launched and I'll still have a combo opportunity. And yes, of course, no matter which side you choose, once they're done blocking Eddie, you still get your choice of an ender. All right, now that we have a ton of mix-up options to work with, let's go ahead and talk about what happens when our mix-ups actually land. And that is, of course, our combos. Zato's combos range from fairly straightforward and simple to kinda complex, but the good thing is his routes that are considered quote-unquote complex, the complexity really only comes from manipulating his negative edge mechanic. So if you've been following along with the guide so far, you should be more than well prepared for that. So for this section, there's not too much to explain in depth as it's mostly stuff we've already covered, so we'll just go over the combos one by one. Alright, so now that we have plenty of ways of converting stray hits into actual combos, let's move on to the next section where we'll talk about what to do after you land your combo, that of course being the Oki section. Because of Zato's natural set play nature, Oki is an area where Zato really shines. If you're not aware, set play is basically a character whose situations kind of repeat themselves. This absolutely describes Zato because his offense usually leads to a mix-up, and if his mix-up connects, it usually leads directly back to more offense. So this looping sort of offense is what people are talking about when they mention set play characters. So with all that being said, let's go ahead and break down Zato's very powerful Oki options. And with that, we have finally reached the end of this guide. Thanks so much for listening, guys. If you made it this far, hopefully you feel like you learned everything you need to know to get out there and start piloting one of the most fun characters in all of Guilty Gear Strive. With all that being said, that's going to do it for the video. Once again, I really appreciate you guys watching. If you found this helpful, I would appreciate a like on the video. It does help out a lot on huge undertaking tasks like this. Like, these videos take a lot, so I do appreciate the likes. If you want to see more from me, consider subscribing. I make guides like this for a lot of different games, with a lot of different characters. I still got more plans for more guides on the way. I also stream most nights here on YouTube and Twitch as well, so be sure to come by if you get the chance. But as always, you guys have a good one, and I will see you in the next one. Peace.